Welcome to this episode of the Best Hopes podcast. My name is Adam Frode.
I'm Cecil Walker.
Today, hopefully we're going to follow the same pattern as last time where I'm just going to interview you.
Oh, no. That's not how this will be. I've got some questions for you.
You don't even know yet.
I will. I can think of it.
But today we're going to just continue on a slightly different trajectory around this idea of awaiting. And one of the things that we have talked about in season 1 that I think that we need to expand a bit more is this idea of the difference between just hope as an empty dream, like, oh, I hope someday I get $1 million, versus awaiting as a form of hope, and awaiting being linked specifically to either the commencement of something, the beginning of something, or the ending of something. Oftentimes we look at like, well, we're going to have a new baby, or we're going to get married. And that's like the beginning of a new chapter in life. Or we look at like the end of a school year or the end of a calendar year. And that marks kind of the completion of something. And we await those kind of pivotal moments. And one of the things that I'm wondering is, as we think about this idea of awaiting a specific event or a specific timetable or something like that, how does that change hope into something beyond just a wish or a dream?
The fact that it's particularly centered around the beginning or end of something, how does that change?
Yeah. Because you know everything.
I was going to say, is this rhetorical? Because I'm not supposed to be answering questions against it.
Well, see, if I start, my hope is if I start this new chapter, we're just going to carry on with it.
Funny how that works. Okay, I will see what my brain can come up with while also thinking of questions from you. Well, I think a couple things come to mind in terms of what changes there. When it's in regards to I'm going to be commencing something, initiating something, or entering into the phase of something, and or ending something else, the first thing that comes to mind is there is a newness to it, which implies a differentness to it. And the best example I can think of, you said the end of a calendar year, and people celebrate and get excited for New Year's all the time, including some expectation of here's what's going to be really, really different this year. This year, I'm going to be more of this kind of a person. I'm going to accomplish these kinds of things. I'm going to live my life in this kind of a way. And I think part of the reason for that is it feels like an opportunity for something different, which is at the heart of what we do in therapy, is change. People want their lives to change, so they go to therapy. People want to relate to their experiences differently, so they go to therapy. They want their relationships themselves to be different, so they go to therapy, all for the sake of change and different and something new. And I feel like that's what this start versus end really introduces, or that's one component to it at least, is I have a chance to experience a new phase of my life, or I get to be something new in this next phase of life. And so maybe school is ending, and then I get to experience some different kind of a life, the summer where there isn't school, which means I'm free. I don't have any obligations. I don't have homework. I don't have things to think about, to go places I don't want to go to. For this time period, I'm experiencing something different. Or, maybe it's the beginning of a school year. If someone's looking forward to the beginning of a school year, they're waiting that for whatever reason. I wasn't that kind of a kid. For whatever reason, if someone is, they're also looking to the change that comes with that. Maybe they like the routine. They like I have something to do. My day isn't just empty and I sit around waiting for something. I actually know I'm going to have something to do. I'm going to be able to see people that I like to see. I'm going to have activities that are scheduled and planned for me to engage with. Maybe I'm on a sports team and I get to finally get back to playing that sport, whatever it is. I think when you're awaiting the start or end of something, it's the change that it just feels much more prevalent, much more easier to grasp and notice and experience in those kinds of terms. But I'm sure there's lots of other components to how that makes a difference for something that you're hoping for. But it's the thing that jumps out is it's change. It's going to be, I won't have what I used to have, and I'm going to have what I want to have. I'll get to be who I wasn't before, and now who I'd like to be. And that's what's so compelling about it. I mean, we're kind of, not to get political on this, but we're in this like election year. And I think the most compelling campaigns in all of history, in any country, really, are campaigns that feel like, oh, some really good, meaningful change is about to happen if I go with this person or this party or, this set of policies. That's how you have some type of, big wave of voter turnout or support, is if there is some really kind of noticeable, palpable feeling, very strong feeling kind of change that is standing behind someone that really starts to make a difference. I think, we saw that with Barack Obama, whether you agree or disagree with, where he falls on the political spectrum. People anticipated a lot of change would come from him, and they were very excited about that. So he had a huge turnout in how many people voted for him and supported him in his first election, and even in his second election. And I mean, his campaign slogan was hope and change. Mm-hmm. I think there was a sense of differentness, especially in the fact that he was, the first not white man, at least not fully white man, to be president. That in itself represented, I think, a lot of change. And so I think that's what the excitement is for. And I would imagine that's the same thing that fuels the, I'm awaiting a period, something different that's coming, the start of something or the end of something that's going on right now.
Yeah, the thing that goes along with what you said is, if there is I'm going to add a word that you didn't say, but if there's an expectation of change, then in awaiting that, it's not just passively sitting, but it's deliberate action in attempts to bring about that expected change, right? If you use the example you used of Barack Obama, maybe I go out, I campaign. Maybe I, go to rallies. Maybe I, register all my friends to vote, or, whatever it is. I'm excited about this change, and therefore my behavior reinforces I'm going to try to do something to bring about this change. That led me also to think about a similar but different example. And sometimes when we await the arrival of something, we're also expecting, kind of going back to that word of expecting, a certain experience. And so we can, again, try to create that in advance. We can put all the preparations in place in order to have a certain kind of experience. And the example that came to my mind is kind of a silly example, but when my oldest daughter was in high school, Taylor Swift was on this Eras tour. I guess she's still kind of on an Eras tour, but not anywhere near us. And so my daughter somehow won the lottery with her friend, somehow got tickets, somehow, we were going to send her to the masses. And in preparation for the months leading up to the show, she followed all of the other places where Taylor Swift was performing. And by and large, I know way too much about this tour, having never been to a concert, but by and large, the set list was the same. The only thing she would do differently is add what they call three surprise songs. And so my daughter, Rachel, was tracking which songs were the surprise songs for all of the different locations. And she was trying to anticipate and guess what three songs will be our surprise songs. And the list kind of kept whittling down. And she had these hopes and expectations of, I want at least one of these songs to be the surprise song. But in addition to that, she made a playlist on Spotify of the set. And at first I was like, you're listening over and over and over to what you're going to experience live. What's the point? What's the point of listening to it over and over and over? And what's the point in going to it live if you've listened to it 1,000 times? But that level of familiarity
Mm-hmm.
built anticipation of, I'm going to hear this live in person. She also decided, she went on the website beforehand, looked at all the merch and figured out, okay, I'm going to buy this merch. And you could just see, she started to envision for herself. She went out and got pink earrings and heart sunglasses and the whole thing, because she had to be part of a particular look, right? And so her clothes reflected what she wanted the experience to be like. The merch, she knew that there was a band that would open for her, and she knew we have to stand in line. She'd read all these blogs about how to get merch and not miss the concert. So you have to go early, you have to get your merch while the band that's opening is, and so she anticipated, she was awaiting this big event, but she knew she wanted it to be a certain way. So it influenced what she listened to, it influenced what clothes she wore, it influenced how she prepared for the event. And then when she went to the event, it could meet those expectations because she had those clothes on, because she was with this friend, because one of her songs got picked as one of the secret songs. Mm-hmm. And she also then could pay attention to the small details. She could come home and tell me, on this song, she sang it slightly different because I'd listened to it 1,000 times. I knew where it was new and different for us. And so all of a sudden, this connection was more meaningful because of all of the work she had put in to awaiting this event. And I think that the lesson in all of that is, when we put our hope into something, into an expectation, our behavior can change, can reinforce that expectation, can almost even bring that expectation about. The more energy, the more effort, the more research that we put into it, the more we almost have influence on what our experience of the awaited event is going to be.
I think that example and the word of expectation too is really accurate to exactly what we're talking about. How there is a creation of a certain kind of experience through your process of awaiting, and it changes the outcome you get in the end, through, whether there's this presence of an awaiting or a lack of that, or what you're doing with that waiting too. I think it's interesting you mentioned all that, because I was just talking to a musician friend of mine about the difference in performances. And he's very knowledgeable about music and listens to all kinds of music and has seen all kinds of live music. And he can appreciate when, someone is like improvising, in a performance and doing something new, or just taking a new take on a song, or maybe even playing a whole new song that he hasn't heard before. But we were talking about how, in general, especially with really big popular musicians, most of the time the audience doesn't want you to change the song and play it exactly the way that we know it to be. And you can do a cute little like, oh, she sang it this way, or the music went a little bit this way, or, they changed something and it kind of created a different kind of a feel or a different experience there. But for the most part, I need to recognize the song. I need to know this is the song I love, especially if it's a really popular song. And I also had heard recently on a podcast where the comedian Conan O'Brien, who had done like a whole, career of comedy of like decades and decades of performing and his late night show and all that. And he said that there's a distinct difference, because in comedy, if you tell all the exact same jokes the way that they're in the special, or they're on some recording that someone's heard before, people, they might enjoy it. I mean, they might, still laugh and say, oh yeah, I remember that joke, but you haven't created a lifelong fan now. You have someone who's just like, okay, that was fine. And they're going to go home and maybe never check out your stuff again. And because what they want is for you to have something totally new, for you to create the experience they're looking for, is you to give them some fresh new take, for you to use, what they assume is just funny about you to, do something different, do something new. And it's exactly the opposite with, your favorite musician, pop star, whatever, is following you for all these years. I love all your songs. Do it exactly the way that I've loved it this whole time. And the experience I get is I get to be in front of you, hearing it straight from you, this song that I've loved and this song that I have all these memories with and all these different, memories and significant things that I've attached to it. But I think you could see how if you're awaiting these different things, your mental expectation of what you're picturing and what you're thinking about that outcome going into it is going to be very different. But also, like you alluded to, the quote preparation that goes into that kind of an experience too is going to be totally different, because you wouldn't listen to, comedians, Netflix special or a recording of their best jokes a million times going up into their live show the same way that you would do like your Taylor Swift's, because it's a different experience. It's a different thing that you're awaiting. But I think what that really demonstrates is it actually does do something. What you're awaiting does ignite a certain type of change, of engagement, of process in you moving toward that thing. And so it doesn't matter what you do, because it's going to be different if you are waiting something different or if you are not waiting anything at all. And what that should tell people, I think, is that it's, in my eyes, worth it. But you should at least try it to see how it does change things. What do you start to do when you're awaiting some specific type of an outcome? When you have a certain type of expectation, you should try that to see, is it better to have these expectations and have whatever comes along with that, whatever shift in behavior and thinking, or is it better to not have any expectation and let yourself kind of drift by, or have, like you were saying earlier, some more shallow form of, I hope this happens, but it's whatever.
Two things come to my mind. One, we've talked about elsewhere, but it's the idea of bioinformational theory, where musicians or athletes, they just go rehearse mentally over and over and over in anticipation of a performance or a game that's coming. And one of the things that we know is that the brain can't really decipher, is this just mental rehearsal? Yeah. Or is this physical rehearsal? And I think sometimes we might get stuck in the preparation because we might think, oh, well, I can't go and do the task, and therefore I can't practice, I can't warm up, I can't get ready. But even just that like mental rehearsal, the smaller the details that you can get to, the smaller you can break down the task, the more you can repetitively go over it again and again and again in your head. That mental rehearsal is even a contribution, I think, to this mental awaiting, to building hope. Oftentimes when we're doing that mental rehearsal, we're hoping to get to a place as close as we can to perfection. And I think that's one of the things that I would say about this idea of awaiting is that, and we made this distinction, I think, in the last episode, is that that's different than just waiting. Waiting is this passive, this just letting time go by. Whereas awaiting really implies energy, effort towards something. And that effort can be mental effort. It can be orienting ourselves to a particular performance, to a particular way of engaging. And just by mentally rehearsing, we know that we're going to get closer to perfection. So that was one idea that came to my mind. But then it also led me to another observation, but also then a question. The observation is going back to the first episodes that we made of this season. And we broke down all of these different synonyms into a couple of different categories. One was present tense versus future tense. And so much we put awaiting in the present tense category. It's something that we do right now, even though we may be anticipating something in the future. But then the other distinction that we kind of made as we were walking through this is internal versus external. And we put awaiting as an internal thing. And I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about that. Why might awaiting fit into an internal place? And just again, as a remander, we kind of did this categorization based on the explanation. So when we said awaiting, we meant to prepare, to be prepared for, or to count on something. And so as you hear that, like the present versus future, internal versus external. Why did we locate it where we did?
You're asking about the internal part or both of these components, the present tense and the internal part?
Whichever you decide to comment on.
Well, I feel like the present tense part is a little easier to see. That's the, like you said, this is happening right now. This is what I'm doing right now, is awaiting as I anticipate something in the future. But the internal versus external part might be a little harder to decipher. And I think that exists in that categorization because it's what's happening to you, but not in the world, so to speak. I don't think, hardly feels like awaiting is even an action in of itself. It's more of a like state that you're in, maybe a mindset that you're in, maybe a setting, like when you put your phone on a certain setting, like a setting that you've turned yourself into. That to me sounds like a very internal thing that I've shifted into this particular kind of a gear. I'm in the awaiting kind of a gear, and that might leak its way into. So that means I need to do certain things, and that comes out of me. That becomes external. That becomes something very observable. But I think the awaiting itself is, here's where I'm at in terms of what my mind is fixed on, what my headspace is like, what expectation that I have, to reference what you were saying earlier. And so that's very, very different than, some more explicit external kind of a state or way of describing, what's going on in the situation. Did I answer your question sufficiently?
Yeah, I really actually like the analogy of it's a setting that you put yourself on, right? And you think about, I'll just use the phone as an example. If you put the phone on a certain volume setting, right? The setting that I prefer is a lot quieter than the setting that my son prefers.
I notice.
and so that also influences our experience, right? I want a particular experience. And like you said, it's going to change the output. When my phone rings, it'll be at a certain volume. When I play a video on my phone, it'll be at a certain volume. If I put my phone on speakerphone and I'm talking to somebody, the output is different. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good example to this awaiting. When I put myself in the awaiting mode, then when challenges come along, I encounter them in a certain way. When I'm thinking, then my thinking goes through this awaiting filter. It's going to come out a certain way. So it's not like I'm trying to control the environment, but what happens is everything ends up going through that filter. And so then it's influenced by that setting that I'm on. I like that example.
Well, you got to ask your question.
I should have kept it.
No, we don't have time for that. So we're diving into these different corners, awaiting in your relationship to the thing that you are awaiting, the thing that you're anticipating. And you've asked about, the relationship between that awaiting and what does it have to do with the start and or end of something. It makes me wonder, and I might have actually brought up something like this in the first season, but you can go into a deep dive here even further. Is there a way to enhance that period? Because when I think of awaiting, I think of almost like a loading time. Like the thing hasn't come yet. And so I have to do something with this time. And awaiting means I'm trying to make the most of that time in a certain kind of a way to either get me there or hold me over till that thing comes. And so maybe this is a very broad question, but how do you make the most of that time? How do you await effectively, I guess?
I think the temptation is to equate awaiting with control. And to say, if I await in a certain way, if I prepare in a certain way, I can control the outcome. And I don't think that that's a fair comparison, because I think oftentimes we're awaiting something outside of our control. And so I think that distinction is important, because then it shifts to, if I don't get to control that thing, what's the point of awaiting? What's the point of preparing? And I think, the way that I would say it is, because we do have an impact on who we are, on who we become, on the way that I live my life. In our work, we oftentimes talk about the version of myself. And I have a lot of ability to say, what version of me do I want to be? And I think when we take that idea and we say, I am awaiting, I am hoping that this event arrives, that this culmination happens. When I have a hope of, I hope this thing, then I also intrinsically get to say, who do I want to be when this event occurs? And so all that preparation, all of that anticipation, all of that awaiting, all the effort that goes into it, all that mental rehearsal, it's really to become who I want to be. And what's really, I think, important about this is whether that event occurs or not, I've become a certain person of myself that's in line with who I want to be. So if you go, this is again kind of a silly example, but if you go back to the Taylor Swift concert, let's say on the day that my daughter was supposed to go to the concert, Taylor Swift gets sick and the concert's canceled. She doesn't have control over now all this experience I wanted to have. I don't get to have it. But she does get to look back and say, but I know her music really well. I have memories that are created with this. I got to anticipate all of this with my friend. It's a big disappointment. But all of that work has changed who she is. It changes what thoughts she has, what songs are running through her head, what clothes she decides to do, what things she posts in her social media, how she interacts with her friends. That has all changed. And some might argue it's changed for the better, and some might argue that it's changed for the worse. But I think that example is change has occurred regardless of the event that happened or didn't happen. And so I think what it comes down to is, who do you want to be? Mm-hmm. And all of the awaiting that you do can turn you into that version of yourself. You can become that even if the awaited event doesn't actually happen.
I think that really demonstrates how hard it is to separate the awaiting phase itself from the thing being awaited. Because when you look at it that way, of you're entering into being a certain version of yourself in anticipation of this thing, because that's who you need to be for that thing, then in essence, the whole process of becoming that version of yourself is an extension of that thing in the first place. Kind of like, I had a friend who just ran the Peachtree Marathon earlier this month. And in order to prepare, she obviously started running every week in order to, do a decent job at the, it's not a marathon, it's a 10K. And even if it got rained out, or those people are crazy, they would still run anyway. So the rain wouldn't matter. But even if it was canceled somehow, or for some reason, she herself couldn't run it, she would still be very capable of running however well she would have ran that particular day. And in fact, she said she ran it much better than she had run, all the weeks before. And that made her feel like maybe I should do a bunch of more 10Ks all the time. That was the first 10K she had ever done. So, and, I think another similar example is like, I never liked tests in school because I feel like you know it or you don't know it. And this number doesn't really make a difference because what if I was having a bad day, or I didn't eat breakfast, or, whatever could have been going on, and the number on the test just would have changed for some reason. But how much I know wouldn't necessarily change. And I think, you can study and work really hard, pay attention in class and all that. And so in the process leading up to that big exam, that's what the real emphasis is on. And it matters what you do on that exam day. It matters what you do on the day of the 10K. But in some regard, it's hard to really pull apart the line between the work it took to get to that part and the moment right there that you were anticipating in the first place. You could say that moment still matters, but it's also the emphasis is on the process of becoming the you who showed up to that moment. And that's what, really matters the most.
Yeah, I actually really love that you kind of concluded with it's the becoming, because I think again, kind of in those dichotomies that we set up. The becoming is an internal thing. I'm becoming something, but it's also a very present tense focused thing. In this moment, I have become, or I'm in the process of becoming. And then, so I think I really kind of hone in on that. And I think the final thing, I guess, that I would say is that it also then, again, puts it into our control of who do I want to become? And these awaited events may give me hope that I could become that, may give me motivation that I can become that. But it isn't the event that's going to make or break. It's that process of becoming that really is the evidence of this hope, this awaiting that has occurred is paying off.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's the only way to look at a lot of these things, especially if you're in the process yourself, because that's what's going to make the biggest difference in terms of how you really, I guess, to the question that I asked, make the most out of that particular moment.
Very good. Anything else we should make sure to get to?
I think we did it all.
As always. All right. Well, hopefully that was a useful conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts on this idea of awaiting certain events and how it intersects with this process of becoming. So please let us know, put in the comments. But also, if you think that this might be useful to somebody who's in that becoming process, feel free to share this with them and let them know that hope will pay off along the journey. But until next time, go be hopeful.